All right, good evening. We're going to start promptly at 7 p.m. Welcome to our May edition of our Autism 200 series. Quick little shout out for our summer. So just like last summer, we are going to be focusing on the transition to adulthood and adult services in Washington State. Certainly a much needed area of support that we're still in the infancy. So please come June, July, and August, where we'll be talking about some different adult issues. And we're very pleased to have Ed Holen this evening. He is the Executive Director of Washington State Developmental Disabilities Council. He has been in that position since 1991. He is co-director of the Washington State Community of Practice, supporting individuals and families over the life course, which is a project that explores new ways to support people within our changing times. Thanks, Ed.
Thank you. Well, good evening. Hi. I'm always glad to be someplace at 7 o'clock in the evening on any night of the week. Being a morning person, this is a real stretch for me, but bear with me. I'll see if I can do it. Now, if this was like 7 in the morning, I'd be out there ready to go and moving on down the road. So Jim just introduced me. I would like, if you wouldn't mind, could we go around? The room isn't that big. Let me know what your name is and maybe where you're from and what brings you here this evening. So can we start with you?
My name is Michelle.
Michelle?
I live here in Seattle, and I'm here because in September my 3-year-old Ben was diagnosed with autism.
Uh-huh.
And I have no idea what I'm doing.
Great.
My name is Emily, and I'm a speech language pathologist. I work here in Seattle School District, and I'm just here to find out about resources.
Great. Nice to meet you.
My name is Leanne. This is Mark, and I'm here for a work of life, like from Montreal. And my son just turned 18, and so I'm just starting to deal with that.
Yeah. Yes.
My name is Victoria. I live in Sammamish. So it was a long drive to the ring for me. I am here. My son just recently turned 16. So we're kind of been growing.
Transition ages. Uh-huh.
My name's Rose. I live here in Seattle, not too far, Central District. I have a 3-year-old that just recently got diagnosed, and I'm just trying to figure it all out.
My name is Lourdes. This is Jack. I am a grandparent of a 5-year-old grandson and a brother, a 3-year-old grandson, both with autism.
Great.
I'm Mark. Got 3 kids, 6, 5, and 3. With one's autistic, and the other 2 have other developmental delays.
Great.
Hi, my name is Chris. I live in Seattle. I'm not terribly far up Burke-Elm Trail. And I have a 27-year-old son who was diagnosed a year ago. Even though he couldn't speak when he was 3 years old, I kept saying, he's going to be okay. He's going to be okay. So.
Great. Well, welcome everybody. Let me just amplify on my introduction. If you were subtracting quickly, you will find that I've been with the Developmental Disabilities Council for a long time. I've been the director of the council for 25 years. So I've been working this whole system for 25 years trying to figure it out. And I don't know if I've any further along today than I was 25 years ago. I hope I am. But I will share that knowledge with you, experience with you. I also have an adult stepson who has a developmental disability. He is 41 years old, works full time, does pretty well, lives at home with us. And I'm also a grandpa of a 4-year-old with autism. So I have some personal insight and personal experience. And let me tell you, I've been down several of these roads several times. And I've walked these roads with a lot of families in our state. over and over and over again. So it's great that you're here. I have a couple things that I want to give to you this evening. Free. One is a resource of information. If you haven't seen it already, these are for you. You can put your papers into them. Would you mind just kind of passing it back? This is a listing of statewide resources and telephone numbers and websites that people find useful. We hand these out by the thousands. Last year, in 2015, we distributed 16,000 of these to folks across the state. These are statewide resources.
So will you tell our other sites where they might be able to acquire some of the things that you're handing out?
Yeah, everything, at the very end of my PowerPoint, there's going to be an email address, and you can acquire any of these in any quantity you want from me. I'm more than happy to send them out. So if you're working with other folks, in some ways, we just sent out 2,000 of these yesterday to the Issaquah School District, who are passing them on to families that they work with. So these are resources. One of our partners in this effort, on the very back, you might notice, is Seattle Children's, and we're glad to have them a part of our effort in reaching out and providing information to folks. My presentation this evening is about developmental disability services. But before I talk about services, I want to not talk about services. And I'll show you why in just a moment. Whether you know it or not, this is a movement. It's called the Disabilities Movement. Sometimes it's called the Disabilities Civil Rights Movement. We don't think of people with labels or conditions. People with disabilities and families are a part of a movement that's just not the city of Seattle or just not the state of Washington. It's a movement in the United States, and in fact, it's a global movement. And like any movement, we have a goal. And the goal is, and the vision for people is to live a life. Now, probably all of us would say, hey, that's my goal too, to live a life. To live a life. Isn't that what we want for everybody? Okay. And that's what we want for everybody. That's what I want for me, that's what I want for my son, and that's what I want for my grandson. And that's what I want for the 42,000 people in the state of Washington who have developmental disabilities, to live a life. There's an idea that we're trying to talk about a lot, and that is that from the time a person is born, that we're on that pathway, that trajectory to living a life. And I'm going to put a modifier out there, living a meaningful life. Sometime you might want to do this exercise yourself, or maybe for your sons, daughters, friends, grandkids. And that would be to fill in that circle. What does a life mean to you? I sat down, and these are some of the things that a life means to me. Welcome.
Thank you.
It's great to have you.
Thank you.
These are some of the things that a life means to me. Having a place to live, a home, family, friends, hobbies. Anybody have hobbies? I love to cook. I'm missing out on that opportunity this evening, but I love to cook. Transportation, getting around, having some choices. Living a life. And we suggest that that should be the goal for everybody. From the time that we're born through school into adulthood, living a life. Now what's in that circle, or cloud, or whatever you want to call that, might be different for you than the things that are important there for me. I mean, lives are different, right? They may look different, but in the end, that's the goal of the disability movement. There's a quote, and the quote is, "Disability is a natural part of human life, and the presence of a disability does not diminish a person's rights nor opportunity to participate in life." Disability is a natural part of human life, and the presence of a disability does not diminish a person's rights nor opportunity to participate in life. Do you have any idea who said that quote? Anybody want to be brave and guess? You guys have great excuses because you're eating. Anybody? Einstein? No? No? I wish. You're the second person in 3 days that have said that. I was doing a workshop on Tuesday, and I did the same thing, and they said, me? No. I wish. Yeah. Idea. Good idea. You know who said that quote? The United States Congress. That quote is the law of our country. And the Congress said that as its vision for people. It's in a piece of law that's called the Developmental Disabilities Assistance and Bill of Rights Act. It's in the Americans with Disabilities Act. It's in the education law. And it's in any public federal law that pertains to people with disabilities. In some way or another, you'll find those words. Disability is a natural part of life. And it's about living a life. That's what our goal is. That's what the disability movement is all about. And I think as moms and dads and grandpas and grandmas, that's what we need first and foremost to think about. Before we think about services, before we think about other stuff, think about living a life. Because you know what? There's the quote. It's awful easy once a person has a label of disability to get off that trajectory to life and end up on a different pathway. Early on, people get labeled and they get on a different pathway. You begin to get into special stuff. What do they call education for students with disabilities? Special ed. I could never figure that out. To me, it's education of students with disabilities, not special education. Or you think you need to get, I hate to say this in this building, but kids with special health care needs. Now, I definitely don't want to say this in this building, but I don't like doctors. I don't like going to a doctor. I hate doctors. So anytime I have a health issue, that's a special health care need to me. Why do we label? Living in the labeled world sometimes causes people to begin to be isolated. Isolated. And set apart. And in our country, we have a long history of setting people with disabilities apart from. Apart. Could be apart in education, apart in where they're living. I broke it. Apart in terms of where they live. Move into institutions. Okay? Why? If disability is a natural part of life. Natural part of life. No, I kind of know it, but
Yeah. I'll get it up for a second. Something weird happened.
I told you I shouldn't said anything bad about doctors being in this building. That is not getting started on a good foot, is it? Pardon?
Some of our kids have really needed those doctors. My son was a freaking flyer here.
Yeah. And I don't know if this is challenging or not, but I think it's important that we think of the vision. To think of the vision. I told you a moment ago that I put a qualifier on living a life, living a meaningful life, and that's defined differently for different people, right? What's meaningful to you may not be the same as what's meaningful to me, and that's okay. That's okay. What's meaningful to a 3-year-old and what's meaningful for an 18-year-old and what's meaningful to a 50-year-old are going to be different over time, and that's going to change.
She's fixing it.
She's fixing it.
It's actually not up here. It's actually someone else. Melania's got it. Good.
All righty. Thank you. We'll embarrass her. We'll make her work a lot tonight.
I know.
How's that sound? So keeping that vision in front of us, I think, is extremely important. What I think is important also is to say, okay, so what does it take? What does it take to living a meaningful life? And I mostly talk a lot to moms and dads and parents and individuals themselves with disabilities. And they tell me that the 3 most important things it takes to live a meaningful life is information, planning, and technology. And I'm going to say a lot of things about 2 of those, not so much about technology, but because that's another whole workshop that I have. Let's see how I'm doing. Yeah, hey, guess what? Okay, information and planning. One of the goals that we have is to make sure that people know as much good information as they can possibly get their hands on. Because I want everybody in this room, how many of your sons or daughters are clients of the DD administration? Okay, so you all have case managers, right? Not yet? Okay, you may. I want folks to know more than their case managers. Okay? Sometimes I think we're stingy with information. Our goal is to get information out. And I'm going to give you a connection to information, and we're constantly putting out news stories, sharing experiences, and I think it's so key to keep that connection. It's a website called Informing Families. It's all one word, informingfamilies.org. Now, if I was really high-techy, we would go into a little virtual tour of the website, but since I'm not so high-techy, I'm going to give you a couple screenshots to familiarize you to what's on that site and what we try to do. The information on that site, when you go onto it, and this is the front page, is a series of ages. Because we figured if somebody has a little one that's 2.5 or 3, they may want to read about that section. If somebody has a son or daughter who's 18, they might want to go into the 18-year-old. If somebody has a 51-year-old, they might want to go into the 51-year-old and skip the other stuff. So we've organized it by ages of life. And there's a lot of information. If you click that button, you'll go in and you'll get a little summary of what's going on in life for a person who is from birth to 3, and some resources. Speaking of resources, if anybody came in after I passed these out, did you get one? You want more? Okay. I'm probably breaking all the rules tonight because they told me to kind of stand in one place.
It's great. I like it when you move around. You're like Oprah.
Oh,
Thank you.
not in terms of my bank account, but.
Well, just keep working.
But the button on this page that's the most important in my mind is that little button up on the top. Because that's where we post all of the information that we send out. It's the menu button. And if you push that button, you'll begin to call up a number of pages. This is a page that has news, new stuff coming out. And by the way, if you go in and do this video right here, it's one of the best videos that we've ever made. We made it for March, which is Disability Awareness Month. And it's a series of people, adults with disabilities, talking about things that are important to them. And you know what? They do not once talk about disability. They talk about the fact that they're an advocate, a homeowner, a Seahawks fan, a professor, owning my own business. In the second half of the video, this is a PSA, so it's meant to be seen by people. The second half of the video simply says, just like you, just like you, just like you, just like you. Go ahead and try it. All of this website is mobile compatible. So you can call it up on your phone. It's formatted for this. It's very easy. My daughter, this is a new phone I happened to get about a month and a half ago. My daughter put it on the front page of the phone for me because I go there in fact, I go to this site every day. Because while I know what's coming down the pipeline in terms of article, I never know when they get posted. So I like to go on there and check out to see, just in case, is there anything new that's been posted? Yeah, there's a bulletin that we put out today that because of a mistake that was made, DSHS is refunding people money for improper evaluation of hours. So some people in our state are going to be getting checks in the mail from this miscalculation. That's kind of cool. And there's an article on enhanced respite for children and youth. Okay? So it's a useful place to go to get information. And if you want to be first on your block to get the information, there's a place to sign up right under Never Miss a Beat. You can join our listserv. Just put your email address in there, and you'll be getting announcements of these things coming out. And you may say, hey, I'm interested in that, and go to the site. Or you may say, I'm not so interested in that. Well, skip it that week. Okay? So we're constantly putting this information out. We get over 6,000 views on this website a month. Okay, 6,000 a month. So it's fairly well used. And the more we can use it, the more we can get people using it and get connected, I think that's great because that's information that people are getting. At the very bottom of the front page, there's kind of a little map. If you want to get through the site more quickly, you can get some guidance. It's fairly intuitive to use. It's not very complicated, and we made it that way in particular because we want it to be easy for people to use. Okay? So information is important. Second thing that's important is planning. This thing is brand new. Some folks haven't even seen it yet. So you're kind of some of the first. Could you walk some of these back? Would you mind? If you wouldn't mind kind of just passing it back that way. This is a set of information, 4 pages. So when you get it, don't open it. Just look at the front page. Okay. This is a 4-page document. We're calling it the Early Welcome Package. It's a packet of information that we've put together for people who are just coming to the DD system. Maybe they've just had a son or daughter diagnosed, just born, haven't even come to the system yet. And on the front page, basically this thing talks about planning. And if you look at the very middle, you'll see that little, somebody holding a hand. And if you click that, or go to that website there called mylifeplan.guide, not .org, but .guide, there's a planning application, a person-centered planning application that's online, that's free, that you can use. You can use for your son, your daughter, grandson, granddaughter. It's organized by age group. So some questions may not apply yet, or maybe all questions do apply. It's something that a family can use in the wee hours of the morning or late at night, and it's yours. It's your information. You can fill it out, you can leave it, you can come back to it, you can revise it, you can work at it at your own speed, at your own time. And you can save it. And that information gets saved up in the cloud. It's secure, as you can get secure these days, but it's secure. It's on a platform that banks and others use for mortgages. Unfortunately, there's a downside to this platform that it sits on today, and that is you can't bring it back down and revise it. But we're changing the platform so that you can, once you store it, you can bring it down and you can revise it. The second feature that the new system will have, it'll give you an option that you can email it to your case manager. And the DD system is quite familiar with this. And case managers will be expecting people to walk in prepared for an assessment, for example. I'll talk about all of that and how all that kind of fits together in a minute. Or if you're in school and you sit down every year and you know what you do, IEP meetings, and you try to plan out, you can take it to the IEP meetings and say, whoa, wait a minute, team. Before you all get started, let me say a few things. And you have it there. Now, one of the things that the DD case managers don't know is that on this assessment, there are questions that are also the same questions that are on their formal assessment. So if you've already answered them, you're already ahead of the ball game. So, planning is important. So it starts with person-centered planning, focusing on the individual and using that as a way to chart the future. What's behind that is a form. We're calling it the STAR form. It kind of looks like a star, right? So if you have a goal in mind, in the middle here, what the STAR form asks us to do is to say, well, how can we achieve that through our relationships with other people? friends, family members, people we know. I like to tell the story that, when I was back in college, and they did have colleges back in those days. When I was back in college, I did not get my first paid summer job through a case manager or through DVR, voc rehab, or through a job coach. I got my job, my very first paid summer job, because the lady next door's son was one of 4 owners in a company in downtown Seattle. And we went to her, asked her son, would you hire me for the summer? And he said yes. So I spent the whole summer rolling sleeping bags. What a fun job. By hand. Rolling sleeping bags day after day. That's all I did all summer. But I got paid. So I went back the second year and said, hey, would you hire me again? Roll sleeping bags by hand. Went back the third year and said, well, give me a break that year. They said, okay, instead of rolling the sleeping bags, you can cut the material that's going to get sewed together for this. So I must have walked hundreds of miles up and down this table, rolling out material, cutting material. Went back the fourth year and said, can I have a summer job? Yeah. Came back in, guess what I got to do?
So.
No. No, you could sew through your finger. No, sewing wasn't my ballgame. I got to roll sleeping bags. But by that time, they got a sleeping bag rolling machine. Made it much easier. I got it through the next door neighbor. Yeah. That company that I worked for was a subsidiary of another small company back then. It's not so small today. That company is called REI, Sporting Goods Store, right? So you can never tell. I should have stuck with it. But anyway, I'm here. So how do we gain our goals through the people that we know? How do we gain them through our own personal strengths? You know, it's interesting to me that when we talk about people with disabilities, we often talk about what they don't have. They're called needs. What do you need? Think about what a need is. A need is what a person doesn't have. How come we don't start by talking about what the person does have? Yeah. Great personality. My grandson who has autism, you know, he dances and he sings. He picks up, he loves playing on the iPads. He's learning letters, he's learning spelling, he's putting stuff together. I mean, it's just, wow, you know. But then you take, I know there's somebody with the schools in here. You take him to school and we're kind of focused on what he doesn't have and try to fill that piece up first. Or you go in to the DD system every year and what do you go through? A needs assessment. But what can we get through our own personal strengths? What can we get through technology? What can we get through our communities? Sometimes I think that's one of the greatest undiscovered resources out there is what's around us. What's in our community? Maybe a recreation program. Maybe another opportunity. Might be a job. What's in the local community? And then lastly, what are those things that relate to eligibility services? But I think it's important that we look around the whole star. Whenever we're thinking about the life that somebody lives, that's important. If you open this up, and you can have as many copies of this you want. If you work with groups, especially younger folks, let me know. You can have a whole bunch of them. In fact, I was doing a workshop a couple weeks ago down in Vancouver, Washington, same ideas. And I had these, literally I had it in my hand. I said, if anybody wants these, they're available, free. Come and get them. One lady from the back of the room came up and around the table and whoosh, they were gone out of my hand before I knew what I was doing. Okay. mylifeplan.guide. I want to make just a little distinction for you before we go on so you don't get confused. There's two organizations to know. One is the one I'm with, and one is the other. I'm with the Developmental Disabilities Council. And we're an advocacy organization in the state. And our responsibility is to advocate along with families and individuals with developmental disabilities so that people can live a meaningful life. So we do a lot of fun things like work with our state legislature to help them understand the needs of people. We try some things out. We try some different projects. We do this communication thing called Informing Family. Those are the kinds of things we do. We do not provide any services. We do not provide any services. The Developmental Disabilities Administration is the state agency that provides services for people with developmental disabilities. Okay? And the Developmental Disabilities Administration is housed within a great big organization called the Department of Social and Health Services. We call that DSHS by short. And if I get into saying letters that you don't know, stop me. But it's just shorthand, and I've gotten so used to saying that. But the DD administration is a part of the Department of Social and Health Service. That's the service providing umbrella agency in our state. It's a huge, big bureaucracy. Okay? And since I can stand outside of DSHS, I'm not a part of that agency, I can say things like that, and I don't have to worry about getting in trouble for it. Okay? So the DD administration provides funding and services for people. Okay? We advocate. That's our job, is to advocate.
Who pays you?
The federal government pays me. We're a state agency, but we are federally funded, and our mandate comes out of federal law. So that little job description, that little job description under our name here is basically what federal law charges us to do. The council itself is a 27-member council, so I have 27 bosses. They're appointed by the governor, and that's our mandate. That's what we do. Okay? Now, we're going to start talking about developmental disability services in our state. Just to let you know kind of what the scope looks like right now. There are 42 to 43,000 clients that the administration serves. 42,000 people that they serve throughout the state, all over the state. About 28,000 are receiving some kind of service. That could be almost anything, from respite care if somebody needs a break, to help getting a job, to 24 hours a day living outside the parent's home as an adult. There's also 13,000 people of the 42 that are on a list. It's a special list called the No Paid Services Caseload. These are people who are eligible to receive services, signed up, ready to go, but there isn't funding to provide them services. Now, if you're on the No Paid Services caseload, you'll know that in a couple ways. One, you will not have a DD case manager to call and talk to. And you'll probably be getting a quarterly newsletter that actually comes from us. Because we decided a couple years ago it's not fair that you have 13,000 people that don't have a communication link. And we wanted to provide the link. So here are interesting things going on that might be helpful even if you don't have a service right now. But you know what? There's some really good news. 2 years ago, we were able to get the state legislature to provide funding for 6,000 people to get services. That's the first time that's happened in 30 years. So in the next 2 years, we will be bringing 6,000 people into services from the no paid services caseload. So if any of you are on the no paid services caseload and you need a service, this is a great time and go and ask, because there's money. And the administration will continue to spend that money and serve as many people as they can over the next 2 years. Okay? We were so fortunate, even in these times that while we're going through some economic recovery that's still pretty tight, we were able to get additional funding for people. And that is great news. So I'm going around telling everybody that I can think of, if you think you need a service, if you want a service, now's a great time to ask. Okay? So what do you need to do? The very first page of this, if you open it up, the very first page, or probably the second page, depending on how you're counting, is a page that talks about eligibility. Because you have to become eligible to receive a service. You have to be determined to have a developmental disability. This is essentially a paperwork process. So what you'll do is you'll go in and you'll talk to an eligibility worker, and they'll say, show me how this person, your son, your daughter, has a developmental disability. Do you have some paperwork from the school? Do you have a diagnosis from a doctor? And you bring those in, they'll evaluate it against the criteria that's in law, and they will determine if you're eligible or not. So we tried to outline that process as clearly as possible. We also put some notes in here that there's some things that begin to change. If a person is young, from the time that they're birthed to 3 and they have a delay, you're automatically included on the DDA caseload. And you may be getting early intervention services. After age 3, there's a re-eligibility. I think it's about age 4, where they go and take a look again, because then you have to meet not the criteria of a delay, but the other criteria that is stated in state law. Okay? And I think there's another eligibility time that's closer to 17 or something like that, because people change. Okay? So this is a one-pager that talks about eligibility. The other inside page, I hope, is just a help. In going through these processes, you begin to collect a lot of paper. And this page simply says, keep it and keep it organized, because you never know when you're going to need it again. And there's been some very tragic stories that happen. One of the things that we learned was that some of the school districts in our state keep paperwork and assessments and all of that kind of stuff for 7 years, and then they shred it. Or over in Spokane, they stored all of the paperwork of all of the students with disabilities going through school in one place. And guess what happened? It burned down. And we had an elderly gentleman, older daughter. He wanted to get re-eligible, but all his paperwork got burned down. The psychiatrist that did the initial evaluations, he passed away. He didn't have anywhere to turn. didn't have anywhere to turn for the paperwork. So keep it and keep it organized. And there's a lot of ways to do that. We have some suggestions here. I hear that Seattle Children's has an expandable folder that you can get a hold of. Whatever, you can go to Lowe's, okay? Whatever it is, keep the stuff. It's really important to keep it. Scan it, put it on a thumb drive. There you go. Great idea. Store it in the cloud.
I print them out so often, I got tired, I just print them out of that file. Down to the 3-year-old who got evaluation from the neurologist who told me he was not autistic in 1991.
Yeah. Yeah. So keep it. Try to keep it organized. So you get eligible for services. What happens next? You go through something that's called an assessment. And this is something that happens every year if you're a client of the Division of or the DD administration. Every year. You go through an assessment. The assessment does two things. It tries to determine what the person needs, so what they need, and how much they need of it. Okay? So you may say, I need respite care. I need a break. I'm the 24-hour care provider. I need a break. Okay? So the assessment looks at, do you need a break and how much do you need? Do you need 10 hours a week? Do you need 10 hours a month? Okay? Do I need, I may go in and say, hey, I need help getting a ramp into the house. My son is in a wheelchair. They'll look at that. They'll go through the assessment. Say, oh, yeah, you need a ramp. What kind of ramp? They'll have some conversation. So it could be hours, could be things. Most services are talked about in terms of hours. And the assessment is that process that determines the number, the type of service you need, and the number that you need. And that's something that's done annually. Now, saying that, you don't go through the same depth of assessment every year. You know, you may go through the full assessment. It takes some hours to go through. Next year, you may come in and they may have a conversation with you, the case manager says, what's changed? Well, most things are kind of about the same, but I've been noticing that Henry's behavior is becoming a little more extreme. So then they may talk about behavior a little bit more. They'll look at the things that have changed. So it won't be the same every year exactly. And the case manager keeps record. They type all of this on a laptop through the assessment process. Huh? But it won't be the same every year. But the assessment essentially looks at the level of need and the number of hours. Okay. Do you have questions about that? Okay. So then, what do the services look like? And the very back page of this are the services that the DD administration offers. Let me familiarize you with one terminology, one piece of language, and that's this word, Medicaid. Everybody know what Medicaid is? Do you want to know what Medicaid is? Medicaid is a federally funded state partnership. Every state can elect to participate in the Medicaid program. It's a program that provides services to low-income and other people who need the services. It's a federal state partnership. Now, here's the tricky part. The federal side says, okay, state, if you agree to provide these things, we'll pay for half of it. That's a good deal. the state says, oh, I like that idea. We'll take half the money. The feds say, okay, but you have to play by our rules. Okay? So there's some conditions that the feds put on the Medicaid program. Medicaid has two parts. Medicaid provides health insurance for low income and people who otherwise need these services. And secondly, it provides what's called long-term supports. Okay. So if you're on Medicaid in our state, you could be getting health insurance if you don't otherwise have health insurance, and long-term services. Everything that's listed on the back page here are long-term services. So I'm not going to talk about the Medicaid healthcare side of things. This is the long-term care side of things as it applies to people with developmental disabilities. A little bit more terminology. And sorry if this is getting too far down into the weeds, but it's useful things to know, because if you go ask and you throw a couple of these words out, case managers will suddenly be clicking with them. Oh, I know what they're talking about. Okay? There's two Medicaid pots of service, if you want to look at it like that. One is called Medicaid waiver services, and the second is called Medicaid personal care or state plan services. Okay. All of the things that are listed on this side of the page are Medicaid waiver services. I'm not going to get into the weeds unless you want me to about why just call it a waiver. Just call it a waiver. Okay. There's 5 waivers that the state has for people with developmental disabilities. It's about 3 others that they have for seniors and other people with physical disabilities. I think there's even a Medicaid waiver for behavioral health. I'm not sure. Okay, so we have a lot of waivers running around here in our state. These run from a very simple level to a little bit more complex. Up at the top, the first waiver is called the IFS waiver. That waiver is 2 years old. So this is a new waiver. That's the waiver that includes things like respite care, therapies, includes things like speech, hearing, language services, training, consultation, transportation. Some brand new services that we're able to get into this waiver: peer mentoring. That's when somebody might need somebody to sit down and talk with them. Person-centered planning facilitation. Supported parenting. That's a service for parents who have developmental disabilities themselves parenting a child. Okay. Community engagement. We put that service in there because it sounded pretty cool. I don't have much of a clue what that really looks like in practice. And there's some annual funding levels. So if you go in for your assessment and you're on the IFS waiver, you may get $1,200 a year, $18, $24, $36. Not very much, but it's a beginning point. And a lot of times, those little pots make a big difference. You know, $3,600 a year of respite care buys a lot of respite. Okay. But maybe you need a little bit more than that. Then there's what's called the Basic Plus waiver. And there's additional services, skilled nursing, behavior supports, out-of-home living, job. It's called supported employment, level of services. So it's a little bit more. There's more hours that you can buy, you can get. There's another waiver called the core waiver. And those are for mostly adults who live outside the family home, live more independently, and receive up to 24 hours a day staffing. They usually live in their own apartments, or may have a roommate or two, live in their own house, duplex, fourplex, but usually it's apartment living. People living out in their local community. And there's listed there the services that they get. The next waiver down is a unique and special waiver. Has about 100 people on it. It's called the Children's Intensive In-Home Behavior Support Waiver. These are for children. This waiver is for children who have extreme behaviors and they risk an out-of-home placement. Could be in an institutional setting, could be in a hospital setting. And this waiver tries to keep people at home. Does intensive training, interventions, and you can kind of read the things that are included there. But the idea is that these are preventative things that happen to keep people out of institutional settings. Then the last waiver is called the Community Protection Waiver. It's also a very small waiver, but it's a very intensive waiver. This includes about 400 people in our state who are all adults. They're all dangerous to themselves or dangerous to other people, sexual predators, sexual deviations of various sorts. And they're all served in non-institutional, non-jail, non-prison settings. Without this waiver, they would be in jail or in prison. And they're served very safely. Recidivism rate is incredibly low with this waiver, but it's very small. So you'd probably never have the experience of needing the community protection waiver. But the others are options depending on the need of the person. Okay? And this other column, the blue column, features a program called personal care. Those are services that people need to help them get up in the morning, get dressed, prepare a meal, assistance with bathing, toileting, those kinds of personal care needs. And those are based on hours, and they're not waiver services. They're part of the Medicaid state plan. The nice thing about personal care is that if you qualify for it, you get it. No matter how much funding the state has, you get it, automatic. Personal care is for children and adults. And we recently revised that program. So the big part of it is personal care, but we added two things, and the feds approved it. Our state added skill building as an option. So you may want to use some of your personal care hours to help you build some skills. Like, say you had somebody coming in and cooking for you every day, and you decided, hey, I'd like to learn how to cook. Well, you could take some of your hours to have somebody come in and teach you how to cook instead of having somebody always coming in and cooking for you. Okay? So the skill building has been added. And everybody that's on personal care, every year, everybody gets $500. You can put that $500 toward more hours of service. You can also buy some technology. So maybe somebody says, hey, you know what? If I had an iPad and somebody could help me put together a little reminder list of the tasks that I was supposed to do for cooking, they would say, okay, spend your $500 on, I don't know if you can buy an iPad for $500, but put it toward an iPad, and you can use the technology to assist you in some of your tasks. Or maybe a reminder. Or maybe there's a piece of technology that says, and there are, I have to take certain medications at certain times during the day. Well, there's pill boxes that talk to you. You probably all know this. To remind you, oh, it's now 3 o'clock in the afternoon, it's time to take your next medication. Okay? There are smoke alarms that call you up on your mobile device if something is going wrong in the house. It's called the Nest. I mean, Lowe's has those, right? There's all kinds of, there's a video someplace out there that demonstrates a person living on his own, and he can live on his own because he has 5 pieces of technology in his house. He has a technology that when his door is open, an alarm goes off. And he has that, it's not so much for when he goes out, but when he comes in and is in his apartment, he forgets to shut his front door. So as the alarm goes off, then he knows, oh, I got to shut the front door. He has a talking pillbox. He has a shut-off on his stove I should have thought of this evening. I was boiling some pasta, and I got distracted watching the news, and suddenly it's boiling over and going all over the stove. If something gets unattended on his stove, this thing shuts the whole stove off. And the other piece of technology that he has is if he's feeling anxious or nervous or something's not right, he can call and Skype with his case manager. We have a pilot project we're doing in our state right now. It's called Smart Living. And we're trying to do some of these same kinds of things. We've selected, in this first pilot effort, we selected, I think it's 6 people. And we sit down and talk with them about what technology can do for them, then teach them how to use it. It's turning out to be, we're not sophisticated in the disability movement yet about the use of technology. We need to be, and I don't want to get left behind. But one lady that's in the project, she's an adult, doesn't get out very much at all. Doesn't get out of her room, out of her house. In talking with her, one of the things she wanted to do more of, really wanted to do more of, is have opportunities to visit with her mother. But she doesn't get out very much. So what did they do? Connected her up with Skype. So now she's Skyping with her mom. Another person who is nonverbal, doesn't talk, doesn't express himself, to try to help him, the staff in his living situation, figure out what he wanted to do during the day and what he wanted to eat. They would take pictures, and they would put pictures down on the floor in front of him. So you might have 4 pictures. And then he would roll up to the picture of the thing that he wanted to do or what he wanted to eat. Now, this is 2016. So they went in and they said, why not get him an iPad? So suddenly they were putting all kinds of menus up for him and pictures of food and all kinds of stuff. They discovered his staff, who've worked with him for years, did not know that he liked Indian food. So now they're making Indian food. They're going out to Indian restaurants. Well, what a great new door that opened up. And we're not talking about the big sophisticated smart home stuff. It's just an iPad. Okay. We're going to do more of this. This is a small pilot project, but we're trying to learn how to mesh together people's lives with the opportunity of technology. And I think in the next couple of years, hopefully this will be growing. And we have the resource, people on personal care, or if you're on the IFS waiver, you can buy technology. And we're going to advocate, by the way, and I don't know if any of you want to help us, we're going to advocate that technology be added to the basic plus and the core waiver as waiver services as well. Why not? Why not? Anyway, this is an overview in the simplest way, most clear way I can think of it, to talk about DD services in our state. It's essentially these 2 pots, these 2 packages of services. They're different in some respects, but they're so important to know. Somewhere on here, there's some phone numbers. They're down in this dark blue. I'm kind of colorblind, so I hope I'm saying the right colors. But it's this little column down here, this little box. One of the things that you will quickly learn, if you haven't already, is how important it is to ask. Now, I don't know about you. I hate to ask for anything. Okay? If I need a little ride down to the Link Light rail station, I even hate to ask my daughter, hey, could you give me a lift down to I don't like to ask for anything. But being a part of the disability movement, asking needs to become second nature. You don't have to ask for the technical right thing. If you're talking to a case manager, ask for what your son, your daughter, your family needs. They can figure, they're the mechanics in all of this. They can figure out kind of all the ins and outs. But it's important to ask. So where to call, what to ask for. If you do become familiar with a little bit of the lingo, hey, I need a waiver service. I mean, that kind of sets you down a course. You know? If you say, hey, Ed Holen shared this with us, and we were looking at these things, and under IFS waiver, well, then the case managers will be able to step back and say, oh, okay. They kind of know what they're talking about. That's why information is so important. Change is in the system. You all need to be informed of, as well as the case managers. And my goal is to make sure that you know more than they know. Now, they kill me every time I say that in public, but that's my goal, is to make sure you know more than they know. At the end of June, I'm having a webinar with the case managers in our state, and I'm going to tell them, you all need to know what we're telling everybody else in the state, right? Because otherwise, all these families, all these parents, all these siblings, all these advocates are going to know more than you know. So step up. And I think, side note, case managers are great. You may catch somebody on a grumpy day. I mean, we all know that, huh? I have mine. We all have our grumpy days. The case managers that I meet on a regular basis are the most passionate, caring people that I've ever met. That doesn't mean that they're going to get everything right all of the time. You know, and I have a lot of people call me or email me and say, I just talked to my case manager and they said this, and that doesn't seem right. Then we can take a look at that and say, well, you know, maybe they're sometimes wrong. Maybe they haven't read the latest bulletin that's come out from their central office. Maybe they're not always totally up to date, or maybe they're just grumpy on a given day. But case managers are really great folks, and they work really hard for us, for your sons and daughters. So, saying that, I think it's important to know where to call, and don't be afraid to ask. Don't be afraid to ask. Don't be afraid to ask me. That's my email address. My office is in Olympia. I live in South Seattle, actually, but my office is in Olympia. I always say I-5 is kind of my home. Back and forth, back and forth. Feel free to email me. I usually get back pretty well. Okay. Don't be afraid to email me. Ask questions. Clarify. And I certainly want to give you some time this evening to ask me questions. If there's areas that you don't think I've covered or would like more information about right now, we can. And if I don't know the answer, I'm not afraid, I'll make it up. No. If I don't know the answer, I will take some time and get back. And if we start an email conversation back and forth, that's great too. So I'm going to stop at this point and just see. People have questions? And I think we have to run mics around maybe, because we're being recorded.
Someone who has a question, just
Yeah.
raise your hand and I'll bring it back.
Wouldn't you know it?
So when my kids were first eligible for the IFS funds, we were reimbursed for expenses
So when my kids were first eligible for the IFS funds, we paid for the services or whatever, and then we're reimbursed. And my understanding is now you can only get the services from Medicaid contracted providers.
That's correct.
What is the most efficient, the best way to find out who those providers are?
Well, let me explain why first. Remember I said that Medicaid is a state-federal partnership, and they bring a bunch of rules to the table. They give us half the money, but they bring a bunch of rules. One of the rules is that people cannot be reimbursed for any Medicaid service. So that's the reason why the change. So what we had to do was to create a whole bunch of, and we're still doing this, new recognized contracted providers to provide services. Okay? So the easiest way to do that, I think, is to talk with your case manager and say, who in this area are our contracted providers? You know, is that?
Yeah, but I don't know. I guess it would be great if these were on a website somewhere. You could go on like, okay, I need incontinence supplies. You know, who are you contracted with? Because I would hope you're continually adding to these. Is that available online?
I don't know if it is. I'll ask the question. If it's not, you have a great idea. And if DD administration doesn't want to put it on their website, I think we can figure out a way to put it on Informing Families' website. Because they got some constraints on their website that we don't have.
And if we have recommendations of people that should
If you have
be
recommendations of
providers.
people that you would like to get contracted or qualified to be a contractor, talk to your case manager. My understanding is that in each of the regions, there's 3 regions across the state. In each of the regions, there are people that are working just on getting contracted providers qualified, or whatever the right terminology is. Good question. Because that was a big change in going to the IFS waiver. And it was a disappointment. But that was one of the rules they had, and sometimes they don't give too much. We pushed a little, but we weren't successful.
So I was quite clear. I wanted my son to get a lot of skills acquisition, and he qualified for CFC, for personal care things, and I wanted to get skills acquisition. And I understand I can use this $500 worth, but the people I want him to get it from, which is he's getting services now that I pay for, is DDA qualified, but it's the wrong DDA qualification to get the skills acquisition training for CFC. And I'm going, are those things going to change, or am I stuck? Because right now I can get someone to come in and do things for him that I want him to learn. But and I don't know who's going to teach them. And there's a group of people I'm comfortable with who finally have decided that they could help my son after being suggested from the psychologist. That it's very confusing, and the whole thing is confusing.
Well, and I would answer the question the same way. I would talk to the people in the region.
I already talked to him.
Talk to them again.
Yeah. How long ago was that $500 thing come out? How long ago did you authorize these 2 things on the CFC?
Well, those are fairly new, so it's been within the last year and a half.
Oh, well, my son's only been eligible since April, so I should have known.
Yeah, it's been taking some time for the bureaucracy to build up their capacity to provide the services, either under CFC or under the IFS waiver. CFC is Community First Choice, and that's the program that's called Personal Care. I've just called it Personal Care. Okay, same thing.
Yeah, I want him to, he got there. He's working, he's going to have supported employment, and I know these guys will help with that, but I want my son to learn things like finances and how to live off-site. Thank you.
While I have the mic, I'm not going to sing or anything. The $500, how is that issued? And does it have to be earmarked for, does it have criteria about how it can be spent?
Yeah, it's not given to you in a check, But you get the $500 and then you make the arrangement through your case manager of what service you want to purchase.
So if I wanted to purchase alarms for my doors, so I would know if my kids got out, no.
Probably not. One of the little things that we have to work with here is that this is going to sound odd. It has to be prescribed. So you have to have a prescriber, so it could be a doctor, it could be a nurse, could be a psychiatrist, could be a therapist that would prescribe that, and then Medicaid would accept it. So probably locks on doors wouldn't. But if you're on IFS, it might.
Through what contracted?
Well, there that you would have, they would have to work with somebody to recognize a locksmith who can put the thing on there. It's different. The way I make the distinction, contracted providers to provide respite care and kind of usual things gets more, to me that gets less complicated. It gets more centered on the resource when it's a person that's building something or installing something, installing a lift in a car. So they'll go out and they'll look and say, oh, does that company know how to put a lift on a car? Are we pretty good with that? And then they'll just contract with them.
So the $500 is in addition or separate from the IFS funds?
Yeah, $500 is in the personal care program, so they have to be in the personal care program.
And
you
I
could be
believe
on both.
I think my kids are in both. It's quite confusing.
Well, this is newer, so it's kind of confusing to everybody, even case managers, because this is what changes over the last 2 years.
I don't want to monopolize this, but I have another question. Okay. So I'm wondering if anybody has suggestions about keeping track of these funds. I mean, you want to make sure you're, utilizing what has been provided. I have a hard time when I used to get. If you get checks, sometimes you have no idea what it was for. And it seems like I'm constantly calling somebody and trying to figure out what was this one. Has anybody found a good way to audit sort of when you have to get reimbursed? And then along that line, is there, I guess, kind of make a request, because I don't think it exists. Again, online, it'd be awesome to go in, put in your child's case number, and see exactly where you are with your funds and how much, sort of an accounting.
I've been advocating for years that every client and their family should know how much money each year is spent on them. So we begin to have an idea of how much money year by year by year, but they've not been able to get their systems to do that, unfortunately.
My question is around, I guess, eligibility. My son was recently diagnosed just a few months ago with autism. He's 5. So my question is, do all people who are diagnosed with autism qualify for is it DDD or DDA?
DDA?
DDA.
No.
And how do you even begin the process of figuring it out?
Well, I think I would approach the DD administration, ask to talk to an eligibility worker, and sit through and talk with them about that. The diagnosis related to autism has become extremely complicated, mainly because recently, nationally, they've changed from a diagnostic manual 4 to 5. And that made some changes in the diagnosis of autism. And the DD administration had basically been working with the DSM-4. And some of the things they recognized fell off in the DSM-5. So they've gone back to the 4. Sometimes they've gone to the 5 sometimes. So it's really important to talk to a a eligibility worker, and I know 3 or 4 really great ones that I wouldn't mind. I don't want to do it total public here, but I wouldn't mind sharing their names with you, and they're in this area, that could help sort that through, because it's become more convoluted. Nothing in DD has changed. The source document that they've been using changed, and it made some big differences in autism. Did I?
Oh, this is Katrina. I work at the Autism Center at Children's, and I just wanted to thank you, Ed, for all the great work you guys do at the DD Council. The Informing Families website helps hundreds of families that we work with every day. The bulletins are amazing. You're keeping families updated, empowered. You guys take ideas. I love your idea about tracking, having a database of contracted DDA providers. So just wanted to thank you. No question. Thanks for all your great work. And I do want to clarify one thing about the eligibility criteria. DDA has a really nice website as far as DDA eligibility criteria for autism. So just click on the word eligibility, and you'll see the criteria specifically for autism. Spells out everything. It might not answer all your questions, but it will get you started. And then the other thing I wanted to clarify, that DDA requires eligibility at ages 4, 10, and 18 or 19 now. So it's 10. Just wanted to mention that. Yeah. You can qualify for under developmental delay until 10. Then you're going to have to prove autism at 10, if we're talking about autism here. So, thanks.
I might ask if any of the sites have a question, whether you're in Yakima or Everett or any of those places. Anybody have a question for Ed? We'll give him just a moment, see if someone jumps in. Sometimes it takes a second. We've got one question, according to our lady in the booth.
Go ahead. Hi, I'm just wondering how you get assigned a caseworker once you find out that you are eligible for DDA services.
Well, if you're determined eligible, you will be assigned a caseworker, and you should get a letter that says so-and-so is your caseworker.
We got a letter saying that we were eligible, but we have not been assigned a caseworker yet. It's been quite a few months.
It's kind of new, Ed. You'll get a letter that says your child is eligible for DDA services, but you're on the no-paid caseload, and that's it. So some parents stop there. We tell everybody, like you do, Ed, call that day and say, I'd like to be assessed for services. I'd like a care assessment, and that kicks off the whole thing, and then you'll be assigned.
That is correct. Yeah, if you don't find a name, call back the numbers, and I handed out here in Seattle, and I can get you this information if you email me. The phone numbers, again, they're on the back page of this 4-pager.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Questions anymore? Anything else? We get to get out early?
I think someone's going to come up and talk to you personally. So thanks, everybody, and see you next month.
Thank you.